Oliver Anthony's song Richmond, North of Richmond has hit a nerve. It is resonating with millions and millions of people, not only in the United States, but worldwide. I want to share some insights as a registered nurse who is working in rural America in many, many homes, just how insightful his song lyrics are. And I just want to cover that for just a few moments and explain to you that he has really got a good handle on some major problems that we have as a society. And I would say that those rich men north of Richmond, the politicians in Washington, D.C., are actually hurting the people that they claim to want to help. And I'll explain to you why. I would go to his lyrics where he talks about, Lord, we folks in the street ain't got nothing to eat. And the reality is that in this environment where food inflation is going higher and higher and higher, it disproportionately affects those who are working class and lower. It's really crunching the middle class. And people in the middle class are having to make lots of decisions about what we're going to keep and what bills we're going to jettison. But if you're working class, if you're lower middle class, if you're poor, you don't have choices about discretionary spending to stop. So when the average American is seeing their monthly expenses go up $709 a month, if you are poor, that could be half of your take-home pay. You don't even know where to cut and how to cut. And when your grocery bill 2.5 years ago, when it was maybe $100 a week, and all of a sudden now it's $200 a week. If food that you used to be able to get affordably, you can't, you begin to make choices, and you begin to make choices to get certain kind of foods that are readily available and very cheap. With this current environment, and especially we haven't talked about how many national retail organizations are just simply going out of business. And so what they've done is they've gone into small towns, like Walmart's done this, and we see this in my area, where they've gone in and basically undercut all the local businesses, ran all those retail operations out of business, and now Walmart is saying, oh, we can't make any money in this community, so we are going to just go ahead and pull out and leave these people without viable options for shopping. And now, if you're poor, if you can't afford a lot and your car's not reliable, so now you've got to drive 25, 30 miles away to do grocery shopping. And what's the solution? To go to a gas station, to go to a convenience store and buy just bags and bags of junk food and being crushed. And that's the reality where a lot of people are right now. They're losing their homes. They can't afford to get into a home. They can't afford rent. In our community, there's a little homeless community out behind, in the woods behind Walmart, because people are just hurting. And he's tapping into this feeling of anxiety and hurt that people are feeling. And this isn't just something over the last few years. The pandemic has made it worse. And even before that, these things have been brewing, because there's been this real shift in our economy that is leaving fewer and fewer options for many people to find work, to get work. And the generationally poor, there's less and less options when you've been generationally poor to find your way out. I often hear, well, just tell them to go down and fill an application at the local factory. Well, if you've gone through school and you were passed on through and you don't know how to read and write, or you dropped out, or you move from town to town, which many thousands do in this area, where nobody could catch up to these kids, and they just drop out, they disappear, they can't read, they can't write. And so telling them to go down to the local factory and fill out an application or do something online, they just look at you like, what am I gonna do? I have no hope. And these are forgotten people. And when you're feeling forgotten, when you're not valued, when you're looked down upon, when all you hear over and over again is that you're a burden to society, when your life just is one set of miserable setbacks after another, you get depressed. You feel hopeless. You think there's nothing else that you can do, and life becomes a hustle to get the resources to kill the pain. And in the area that I'm at, I see this over and over again, where people are going out and using whatever resources they can. They don't have any aspiration of a livable house or a job. Many thousands don't have vehicles, and if they do, it's very unreliable. And so they're out in the street and they ain't got nothing to eat. They're in this state of despair, and this inflationary environment hasn't helped them. And so then when they're on their phone and everybody can make fun, oh, they got a phone, why can't they get food? Well, priorities are priorities, and addictions are addictions, and phone is another way to get a dopamine hit. And especially all this online stuff. So they're seeing over and over again all these agendas and all these promises of politicians in Washington, D.C., how they're going to clean up the environment, how they're going to make tax cuts for the middle class and all this stuff. And they say, well, none of that's going to touch me. None of that pays my food bill. I can't afford gas. I mean, I could maybe get a job in the next town, but I'm not going to get paid enough to pay for gas to get back and forth, and just to keep up my car on the road. I can't do that, and I can't even afford, if I work really hard anymore, to just buy a used car to upgrade, because now even those are overpriced. I'm seeing cars in our area, trucks, for people that would be working that are $20,000 and 25 years old. And it's not that they're this collector kind of thing. It's just the rundown, broken down truck, because that's what the market is. And people are just in despair. And then he talks about these obese, milk and welfare. Well, God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bag of fudge rounds. Well, let me just say that there is a reality now with stores closing. Like I said before, all these big box stores come into these small towns and then just drive competition out of business. More things are going online, and healthy food is too expensive, and in many places it's just not accessible for people that are struggling. They're just going to go for the cheapest option. Sometimes the cheapest option is all this canned food stuff and all these things that are very high processed food. It's high in processed sugars, and this is not healthy. It is, and the thing is those high processed foods, those sugars, those sweets, those fudge rounds, they give a dopamine hit. There's a cost to it, but they get the dopamine hit. There is alcohol, and alcohol also, with all those sugars, alcohol is actually high in sugar. So people go to drown their sorrows, to drown the sorrow and misery of their life. And both of these high fat, high processed foods and this alcohol, that's just going to blow out the liver, because you got too much processed sugar running through it. It is just going to lead to liver cirrhosis. So you get both your alcoholic liver cirrhosis and your non-alcoholic liver cirrhosis. And as a hospice nurse, I see people on hospice all the time in their 40s and 50s and early 60s that didn't need to be on hospice, just because their whole life was avoiding its misery, and they end up blowing out their liver, or they blow out their kidneys, and they end up being diabetic. And then they end up getting an infection in their legs, and their legs are amputated at 30, 40 years old. and they end up with constant battles of infections, end up on dialysis. But the options out there to eat healthy are prohibitively expensive. People that are poor that want to eat healthy or could eat healthy find that it is a super, super high expense, especially now. The proteins, the vegetables. It's hard to get something that's high quality that's not going to lead somebody to be 5'3" and 300 pounds. And it's interesting where the obesity epidemic is the greatest is in the parts of our country that are the poorest. Because what we've done is we've outsourced all this agriculture to overseas, and a lot of that comes back in terms of canned, highly preserved goods that aren't as healthy for people. But that's just the way it is. And so these people aren't necessarily milking welfare. This is where I disagree with them. I don't think everybody's trying to milk welfare. First of all, with sugar, this processed sugar is like an addiction. You get a dopamine hit over it. I've been struggling. I've become more aware of it the last few years. And for me, that is an addiction that I'm actively battling now because it is such a powerful addiction. It's hard to get over. Same as caffeine, just like alcohol and other drugs. And you get used to the effects that it has in the immediate short term, and you're craving that dopamine hit. You're craving just feeling better for a moment, even though it makes you feel worse in the long run. And people are not necessarily trying to milk welfare. What they're trying to do is they're just trying to numb the pain, and they don't have access to good food, and they don't have hope. So when he talks about young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground, if you're a man and you see no hope and you see no opportunity for your life to be any different, you're just going to do a slow motion suicide with alcohol, drugs. You're going to get involved in a gang. You're going to just fight it out because your life in your own eyes and what you think society views of you, you don't count, you don't matter. So why not go down in a blaze of glory? Why not take your own life? Your life isn't valuable in the eyes of society as you see it, and you don't feel that you can ever get beyond the misery and being oppressed and suffering. What are you going to do? My life is worth nothing. I might as well take my chance and see what's going to come on the other side, because this side, this life and this physical body just doesn't mean nothing to me. And many people I see that are very early 40s, 50s, 60s on hospice care, they've spent their whole life down, depressed, sad, abusing their bodies over and over again. And finally they start reaping the consequences, and there's an early death, maybe decades before it needs to be. But for them, that was going to be a relief from the life that they were living. And there are a lot, an increasing number of people feeling that way. There are people that get used to being in the middle class, and all of a sudden they see themselves fall out of the middle class. They can't pay their bills, and they see what's coming and the suffering and the hardship, and they just say, I can't take it, I don't want it. And many men are suffering from depression and feeling like they've let their families down and they can't provide for themselves. There are many people that are just saying, I just can't do this life anymore, and they're feeling miserable and sorry. And as he says, because all this damn country does is keep kicking them down. The reality is that there are answers out there. There are problems that are people are screaming about, but nobody's listening. How do you get access, especially in rural areas? And people say, well, just move to the city. What if you can't? What if your only asset is that house that's been handed down for generations, and there's no market for it because people are leaving the rural areas. You feel trapped, and you have no education. You know you can't get a better job in the city, and moving there is just going to be more expensive because rents are higher in the city than they are out in the country. So why I'm going to leave my small town to go somewhere where there's not any real opportunity? My life's not going to get better, and there's more crime and there's more violence, and what's the point? I'm just stuck and I'm trapped and I don't know what to do. And there are many people. I see this as I travel in one of the poorest areas of the country, working as a nurse. I see this over and over and over again, the absolute despair. And what I'm seeing is more and more people, the people that were getting by, before COVID hit and were doing okay for themselves. Now they're dropping down into a lower class and they're struggling and they're having to sell stuff that they used to have just to get by. And so they're feeling it more and more. And this misery is just growing and growing and growing. And, there's not access to good health care. You can have all the health insurance in the world, but if you can't get to a doctor, if you can't get treatment, if you can't get help, if you can't get diagnosis, if there's no diagnostic equipment that's reasonably close to you, all those things, all the health care in the world doesn't do any good. All the welfare doesn't do any good if you don't have real access to lots of good food. And there are many people that don't have access to it, or if they do, good food, high quality food, nutritious food has gotten so expensive that you can't afford it. And it's just making a problem already even worse. And people are depressed and they're full of sorrow. And it is very, very hard and very sad to see. And those of us who are in the middle class, and I'm finding that even my family, we're getting stretched more and more and more. Our buying power has dropped by over $10,000 while we're taking care of my mother and my mother-in-law. We have a daughter who's been facing challenges in her life, living with us, a granddaughter, and we're trying to take care of everybody without relying on government assistance because we believe in family. Family is the place to take care of those and to be family and be together. And so we're working to get by, but it's getting harder and harder and harder. And as that misery spreads to higher and higher levels of society, it is going to create just a firestorm. And I think that ultimately is why this song is resonating, because the pain and the misery is rising to higher and higher and higher levels, so much so that middle class now is even feeling the pain. And honestly, what we see is from my perspective, we see people in Washington, we see Democrats defending President Biden while saying Donald Trump is the worst criminal out there. And we see Republicans defending Donald Trump and saying Joe Biden is the worst criminal out there. And everything that is on the news all the time seems to be one of those cases and trials and what's going on. And yet we're all screaming, we're suffering, we're hurting, and everybody is spending all their time and energy. And why are Donald Trump and Joe Biden even being the leading candidates for both parties? Surely there's some that we can just focus on the issues that we need to resolve, and nobody's listening. Everybody's trying to prop up candidates and engage in these battles in Washington, D.C., and nobody's listening. And that's why Oliver Anthony's song is resonating so much, because nobody is listening. And there are people that are trying to tell us just how bad it is and how many people are struggling, but nobody nobody is listening. The rich men north of Richmond care about their power and their prestige and their backroom deals, and they just don't hear us who are crying out, saying you need to pay attention to what's going on in this country right now and be aware of the suffering and not just make it about a political speech. What's going on to start addressing issues that people are feeling. And I think that's why this song is going viral, and he really is identifying some significant problems that we see in our experience in this country that isn't fully being addressed. I know this is a long video. If you stay to the end, I do appreciate. My name's Chris. I'm an ordained minister and a registered nurse. I specialize in hospice care, and my channel is really focused on healthcare. Talk about lots of different things around healthcare, but my primary goal is to help the terminally ill, their caregivers, and their families to really experience a high quality in those final months and days of life, the best life possible, I say, to create a beautiful sunset. So thank you for tuning in. I appreciate for you to be watching this. And again, I just share in my heart here. If you want to like the channel, that would be great. If you want to subscribe, I appreciate that so much. Thank you.